Over our lives, we all encounter hurdles and challenges, but 2020 likely challenged you like never before. Before we get started, take a moment to ponder what your biggest struggles were over the last year. And then what was the most effective strategy that helped you cope with that stress? I'm Diana Guerrero, and today we're going to be talking about turning turbulent times into transformation with nature. The fact is, many owners and entrepreneurs found themselves, their friends or loved ones, doing some really interesting things. So some of those interesting things might have included baking or stockpiling things like toilet paper. Maybe being more exasperated or morphing into a Frankenstein because you're locked in a space with those you love, trying to work or get things done and do schooling or whatever it looks like in your household. Or maybe you found it was hard to get out of bed, you lacked motivation, or were in inertia. If so, you weren't alone and might not have recognized that you were responding from a survival strategy gone awry. So today you're going to discover which of the 3 survival styles show up in your life and those of others you know, so you can learn how to identify those patterns earlier and get insights faster. And then you'll understand ways to lessen the turbulence you might encounter moving forward. So today's topics are going to get a little bit more into the survival, what I call styles, and how you can go awry with them and what buckets they actually fit into, all those little things that are blipping up, those feelings, those emotional responses, or, well, I should say reactions. And then we're going to talk about change, adapt, or die, which is all about adjusting. And then what you can use as a compass for changing your lens. And finally, how you can get nurtured by nature and a new system that I'll be rolling out. And that new system will help you learn how to more gracefully move through life, reset, and choose to respond versus react. Okay, so change, adapt, or die might make you laugh, but it actually is attributed to Charles Darwin in Error. He wrote Origin of Species and looked at evolutionary adaptation that animals and plants have to surviving in harsh conditions or changing conditions. And certainly we've moved from a very biologically tied livelihood where we had, farming, pioneering, and moved into an industrial age, and now we're in the tech age, right? So obviously things have changed for us a lot, but what it hasn't changed is our reactions to those changes. And you can choose a response, but reactions are kind of programmed in your biology. So I'll be touching just briefly on the different components listed here. And for those of you who want to get into some actual experience at the end of this session, I'll be inviting you to a challenge. If you've lived life, you'll find that we all are healing from something. And those journeys vary, but in the end, we all have similar experiences. So maybe you had experienced a loss of income or a dwelling, or maybe your possessions. A loss of a job or business can impact your identity, kind of an identity crisis. Maybe you had loved ones that died or got really sick or experienced rehabilitation or health challenges. Maybe you've gone through a divorce or estrangement. There's so many things that we go through in life. But early in 2020, I said at the beginning of the pandemic and the shutdowns, this is a world reset. It's a time for healing, because I knew it was going to be a big shakeup. But I didn't have any idea just how true or how difficult it would be on a global level. But what I did know is that I had been through enough that I recognized the patterns and was able to navigate through, mitigate many, many things, and bounce back faster and easier. In other words, I moved through it more successfully than I could have imagined. So I'm going to share my story with you in order to give you some insights on how you can change the lens, your perceptions, through the experience when you look back to find those gifts. So you'll see the challenges related to maybe any physical or emotional or spiritual crises you encounter. So let me get into 2020. So if you're taking a trip, you either need to have a map or a compass or both. And it gets easier to navigate if you have the right lens. And that's a lens that comes from your experiences in life. And I'm going to share, when I get into the survival buckets, a little bit more about that. But 2020 was a very interesting year. And I think that's a polite way of putting it, right? But I know personally people who really prospered, but witnessed others whose world crumbled around them. As for me, it was really mixed, but it really climaxed in a crescendo at the end of the year that shook me to my core. The good news is I got through it quickly because over time I've developed a resilient nature and been able to systemize it in order to empower me to navigate faster and easier. And a big component of that has been time in nature. So the skills I gleaned were the gifts that came through the storms that I went through, and certainly you probably have some from the things you've gone through in your life. That's why they say hindsight is 20/20, right? So the journey is all about passages in life. And in my own growing older, I learned is not for sissies. I heard that before, but now I really understand it. But what I appreciate about aging is the wisdom and skills you develop and carry forward. What I don't like are the losses, since there are many. So, backstory to right before I moved to the Central Coast of California, some of my biggest hurdles were those people in my life that were supposed to love and protect me, and they didn't. The next learning phase, the first one was more about emotional. The next phase was a physical hit. It was the loss of my career and the identity tied to my work with wild and domestic animals. The last big one was the derailment of my entire life as my body and mind were impacted during long-term exposure to environmental toxins. So I'm going to start with that journey, and then when we get into the buckets, I'll share you kind of the tie-ins where I was in my reactions and then how those kind of played out later in my life. So when my body systems began to fail, I was this active, vibrant, strong woman who hiked anywhere from 8 to 10 miles or more a day to someone who gained 75 pounds of extra weight. I blew up to 3x due to the toxicity, and I could barely walk a half a mile. My health and well-being were a thing of the past. I was dealing with memory loss, confusion, edema that started in my lower extremities and went full body, and other challenges that climaxed with a near-death experience. And I'm alive because I've always had a good lifestyle, been active, outdoors, had healthy habits, good diet, and strength of will. But eventually I lost everything but my life. And there I was, with no funds or finances, unable to maintain my business, displaced from my dwelling. I was forced to discard what remained of any belongings that I had, including things from my grandmother. And at that time, the man that had asked me to marry him left me in the midst of it to be with a younger woman. So during that year, when I saw the golden light doorway appear above me, just before the paramedic brought me back, I wondered why I was still here. Life was miserable, and I could barely function, and I can't tell you what that feels like. If you've ever been on the floor asking why, it's kind of like that. So it was a tough year, but the upside was I have some amazing things that happened in my life, and two of my buddies on the Monterey Bay Peninsula said, you know, you really had the worst year ever. Why don't you come up and welcome in the new year as a new start? So I headed up and wondered why I had never been here before. So I started coming up during my recovery and trying to keep things together because we still didn't know what was going on, what was wrong. And by the time we found out what was wrong, I had gone through all the losses. Basically, I wasn't on the streets homeless, but I was couch surfing. And I relocated in 2015 to this amazing place of my dreams, found a little beach cottage. Everything was divinely orchestrated, let's just say. And I was astonished when I realized it was a symbolic do-over. Career started a certain way and my life here started a certain way, and that's another story, right? But soon I was recovered enough to start to test how much I could do and try and find out what I wanted to do next. So 2020 was actually scheduled to be a record year. I had started 2 new businesses in 2017 to test them. They each had a life of their own, and my calendar was so full. And by March 9th, it came to a full stop with COVID-19 and the pandemic. But I knew what was on the horizon because I had seen it and experienced something similar before. Not on a global level, obviously, but on a local level. So what triggered my awareness that it was going to be pretty bad was when I heard the announcement from the Monterey Bay Aquarium that they were going to close. It was an end of the day decision. And because I do things with them and had moved into helping them with some corporate night events, when everything canceled, that was the uh-oh moment, right? So I immediately went into action. So it meant doing things like making sure that my credit card debt was moved to a 0 APR card. I knew that I had most of the supplies I needed, but when other businesses were shutting down, having been through it before, I knew that as a self-employed entrepreneur, I might have hiccups with the unemployment, and that's in fact what happened. But when I was running around, I had this inspired thought of asking for a job. So I went and worked as an essential worker, ended up learning all kinds of interesting things about sanitation and people's behavior. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. There were all kinds of things that happened. I had a great white shark encounter, which made me feel less safe in the sea for a while, and lost the temporary job because it was only temporary. But at that time, things started to move forward. I began working on a pivot. We had lots of trauma drama in the family, COVID deaths, health issues resurfaced for me. The house I live in went on the market, and my best client and a dog that I loved like my own died unexpectedly at 3 years old. The lessons are in the stories, but you can change those stories and your perspective once you know how. Okay, so I'm going to talk about those survival styles now. And so I want to revisit the experiences that you might have had or noticed in 2020, things such as baking, eating, or drinking excessively, stockpiling goods that didn't make any sense, feeling exasperated. Remember I talked about turning into Frankenstein? Inertia, not wanting to get out of bed, or lacking motivation. All those are signs of one of 3 survival tactics from our past. So the survival styles fall into 3 buckets. It's the triple F. They're really rooted in biological reactions for safety and survival. So what are those? Fight, flight, or freeze. And I'll get into those a little more, but if you reflect back to the bread baking, the stockpiling, all those weird things I listed out that people were doing, it's rooted in survival. But because we're no longer out in nature and we are in urban tech-centered areas, our bodies don't really know how to process, and so they are exhibited in odd types of ways. So let me ask you different questions. These also fall into the same categories, and when I get into this a little deeper, you'll understand why I'm spending the time going over it. Okay, so let's see if you have experienced one of the 3. Each of these fits in a different bucket. Have you craved getting away or bouncing back and forth between Netflix and television or other activities you normally never did? That's one indicator. Maybe you've been increasingly irritable or find yourself argumentative or in conflict with others more often than not. And finally, maybe you have been lamenting over lack of progress due to overwhelm, delaying any decisions that you need to make. If so, each of those sits in a different bucket. So let's take a deeper dive. So the first F we're going to look at is flight. And in the past, when we struggled to survive in harsh conditions, that would mean reacting in ways to escape. So you take flight, you run, you flee. But today, it's a little bit different. It looks like activities that have you running around in circles, or you might be engaged in something that makes you feel busy but that are unproductive, or other things that require activity but don't necessarily take you forward. What it feels like is, oh, I need a break. I need to get away. You want distraction. That was like the Netflix thing I talked about. You're scattered. You have trouble focusing. You're confused. What it looks like in the pandemic was massive baking and hoarding of flour and other supplies and stockpiling things like toilet paper. And doesn't make much sense until you think about it from your biological needs. You need food and you need things that help you when you're eliminating in the biological sense. So that's why it manifests in a weird way. Because it's not a rational response, it's a reaction. And it's something that people don't really know how to handle in a pandemic, because most disasters or threats are finite. They occur, you see them coming, they occur, and then they're over. But this time you don't know where the threat's coming from. You don't know what to do to prepare for it. Hence, you see it coming out in all kinds of different ways. Now, in different situations, it might not be so clear. In my case, the flight as a youth, in my preteens and teens, my life was in danger. And so I tried to escape. I ran away from home, or tried to. But the people I went to for help just took me back. And so what I learned to do was morph that flight instinct to get out of the house to get out into nature and activities that could keep me out in nature. So I was always outside. Since my first word was fish, and I loved being near, on, or in the water, I found myself doing that. And the upside to it was my overtaxed nervous system responded to the physical and mental benefits that nature provides. That's now being scientifically validated, right? But it helped me navigate the rhythms and hiccups in my life. So fast forward, when I went into a career where I was really accomplished and brought in to help a world famous animal institution create some positive change, and I got physically hurt by falling off the top of a zoo hay barn, not recommended, by the way. While at the same time, there were some issues that were pretty dangerous and concerning that I had voiced to management, and they were afraid I was going to go public. So suddenly I found myself in this rat in the maze scenario where people were not being forthright or honest. Ultimately, what happened was I lost my job and I lost my career. But on the other side of that, I had a new career. I had a publishing deal the first time I sent out any queries. And that started me, I always say I fell into writing. That started me on the publishing and writing career. Now, the takeaway lesson for me, with a loss of health, physical injury, looking back, I see that the healing and transformation occurred because I had developed a new skill set to navigate more quickly and easily. It took a while to get over the trauma. But when I look back, I can clearly see it was a universal redirect into the life of an author, and then into a living in a dream location and living a life that most people only can imagine. The next F is for fight. This is really about protecting yourself, protecting your children, or whatever, territory, if you look at it from the animal sense. Overall, you stand your ground and face whatever it is that you're trying to thwart. You might be exasperated, as I mentioned before, or turn into a Frankenstein. Remember that one? And symptoms and feelings of this state is when you feel irritable, a little bit off kilter, or a lot off kilter, out of rhythm, you have no patience, you're critical, you're defensive, you're argumentative. So this is where you turn around and face whatever the threat is, and you're prepared to go at it. So what it looked like in my story as a young child, between toddler and preteen, what got me into nature was a yearning for connection. And animals became my friends and my passion. I found mentors and surrogate adults to help guide me. I worked at a young age, and I was recruited into what would be a career by my early teens. And life still felt unsafe because traumas were already embedded in my brain, and it was clouding my perceptions. So, I went through the lens of being innocent to pure terror and having those perceptions that everything was a threat. And then I went into where I had like a pair of virtual reality goggles that replayed those experiences or scenes, which made me anticipate danger and expect the worst, even if that wasn't going to happen. And sometimes the worst did happen, but as I became more secure through my schooling and labor, I began to shift. In the household, I was the oldest child, and I was protective of my siblings. And so in the pivot, because I started with freeze, went to fight, and then to flight. I'm kind of going in reverse order here. But I turned to face my assailant and was protecting myself. But when my younger brother was in danger, I purposely stepped in between the threat and him to protect him, and demanded and threatened, and it stopped. What I learned through that was sometimes it's good to face the fear or threat, stand your ground, bluff your way through, or step in and take action. And this was a skill that would serve me in the future and became a superpower when it came to training large wild predators. It showed up later in my career when I took a stand. The problem in the midst of that, before I hit the other side of being able to stand up and face, even though I was standing up and facing what I feared, it was triggering all this old stuff that I was looking through the VR glasses, the goggles. Right? I had fear that was so intense. I couldn't eat. I was sick to my stomach. I couldn't sleep. I didn't know what I might do, but I persevered anyway. But it also pushed me forward into that new realm. So looking back, I see the journey where I was injured but moved out of dire circumstances, and that pushed me into alternative healing therapies and from nature also. So it took off my rough edges, it enhanced my skills in communicating, and empowered me to share what animals teach and impact others in a soul-stirring way. So it took it to a whole new level. So now we're going to take a look at freeze. And this is when you're unable to escape. You're in stark terror, overwhelm, numbing out. You can't make a decision because you're unable to. Oftentimes you're running things over and over again in your head. This looked like when I first presented the different things seen in the pandemic, was that lack of motivation or inertia and having trouble getting out of bed. But when you feel depressed, indecisive, you have no motivation, you're unable to finish anything, you're overwhelmed, you're fearful, you're distraught, you're hopeless, or in a torpor, that's the freeze. And some animals use this as a very good strategy. I put a possum up there because they're known for playing dead right. But you'll see animals freeze. They just can't move. When you come into the world, you depend on those empowered to care or protect you. And so my story is, in my life, that didn't happen. So there was instability, volatility, abusive experiences that happened before I could even talk as an infant and as a toddler. And it triggered that primal response of intense fear and terror. And I couldn't physically escape the overwhelming threats. I was unable to. but nobody intervened on my behalf. So what it taught me was that I was unsafe, that my life was in constant danger and people were not trustworthy and would not protect me. It also created a belief that I wasn't worthy of love and I was not capable of being successful to overcome my circumstances. And what was interesting about this is, I have these aha moments sometimes where everything like drills down to one moment where you get that clarity. And adults used to say, "You're such an angry child." And I wasn't an angry child. I was scared. Adults misread the intense fear on my face when I froze. And it probably was more indicative of what they were feeling. But one day I was working with this child and he got in trouble and I was real direct and he didn't stop and I physically restrained him. And then when I let him go, he was standing there and he looked really mad and he was stiff and his arms were down by his sides. And I said, "Are you mad?" And he shook his head. And I said, "Are you scared?" And he nodded his head, yes. And I said, "Okay." And I explained everything to him. And I said, "Would you like a hug?" And he said, yes. And he gave me a hug and he started crying. And then he told all the adults, because that's how we process sometimes, is tell the stories, right? So one of the ways kids process is to tell the story and work it out. That's why it's important to listen when something happens and let someone tell the story to kind of dissipate it. So what happened was my natural lens was clouded. It clouded my perception that kept getting worse until, remember, I talked about the VR glasses. I got into the VR glasses. But what happened was I learned to identify really subtle signals that would keep me safe. And I noticed the nuances that hinted of future escalation so I could avoid or subvert danger. And as I got a little bit older, I started experimenting with different responses to behaviors to see what I might discover or change, right? What would work. And in the young age is where I just discovered that animals and nature helped me. I couldn't escape, but I could get into nature and immerse myself and ground myself. I could be with the wild creatures that sought me out and have their company. I could learn from them because those observational skills kept me in rapt attention. My superpower of understanding nature and reading nature and animals comes from that. I could climb high into a tree and survey my surroundings and be cradled and held in a safe place. So in the future, these skills and activities would be the very foundation upon where I would build a system and a strategy for creating a sanctuary when facing difficult times. So looking back, I see this early healing journey, the skills that came from it, and the emotional healing that came from animals and being out in nature. So I've shared a lot of information with you that's meant to help you glean insight into those feelings and reactions you have to help give you the power to become more resilient and move through life more peacefully, no matter what the situation. I've shared a lot of my story because within those stories is a journey of changing my lens, looking back, taking off the virtual reality goggles, taking out those stories in my head and changing my perception, that perspective that was gleaned over different events in my life that skewed that vision, and finding those superpowers and different gems hidden within the journey, whatever your journey's been. So I want to summarize, and I'm going to cover a couple different things. I want to show you what it looks like for a couple people, and then give you some things to do on how to get nurtured by nature. The first steps are, one, you understand the survival style you are experiencing, the survival strategy that you're in, and changing your viewing lens so you can change your perception. So if you were a kid and you were in a classroom, your chairs were just right. But if you're an adult and you go into a kindergarten room, you think, oh my gosh, look how small those chairs are. Your lens changes over life as you age and through your experiences. Revisit things and see if you can shift perspective. And then get into nature and let it help you shift and transform. Because nature will do that by default. You don't really have to do much but show up. Now, there are things you can do. So I've developed a nature system where you can glean practical skills to help you de-stress, feel happier, and get healthier. And it's not out yet, but I'll talk about that a little more when we get to the end. Okay, so you learned that we biologically respond with those survival styles, those survival reactions. And our bodies and minds also biologically respond to nature in a very positive way. So the secret is to get out in nature, number one. But let me ask you, where is your go-to space or ritual? In my area, a lot of people go outside at sunset. They simply head to the shore or to the tip top of the mountain or top of a cliff to watch the sunset. Some people go and hike. I swim in the sea. You can find your spot. You can go spend time there. So find a nearby location and experiment. If you are in an urban area, you might have to work a little harder. If you have a garden, that's perfect. You could go to a park or some undeveloped location, a path that you like, a recreation trail. You can even go to a zoo or aquarium, arboretum, or a nursery. Anything where there's live plants and or animals. In the worst case scenario, if nothing exists, you can create a little place in your home or simply go and look at a video of nature and listen to sounds of nature together. It could be photos, whatever works for you. Start with 5 minutes a day. You'd be better 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. But start where you're at and give it a shot. Notice how you feel before you go out and when you come back. All right, I want to give you a couple of examples of some people I work with that have experienced the benefits of what I call their nature nook. Now, part of my system includes how to create a nature nook. And I wanted to share a couple of examples from two different people, Sally and Kay. Sally actually created a garden space. She is a very accomplished, mature woman who suddenly found herself in back-to-back losses. She's on her second marriage, and she's lost her son, a grandchild, and most recently a pet who was very, very young. When the pandemic hit and we started the lockdown in California, not only did she lose her income when she was laid off from her lifetime career, she found herself facing an identity crisis that was tied to that position. So she had a lot of things happen in 2020. But she found she could find solace in nature by creating a garden sanctuary where she can get out, be in nature, and shift her sorrow and ground herself and be happier while also getting outside, breathing great air, being in the sunlight. In addition, because they're very social in her career and her husband's career, there's a lot of social activities. They were able to create a safe, comfortable outdoor social space, which gave them an option for outside dinners during the unbelievable isolation of 2020. So they have this huge, huge table that is 6 feet across and super, super long, where everybody's 6 feet apart. It's pretty crazy. But it's just a delightful space because she has a Hawaiian section. She lived in Hawaii at one time, so there's a Hawaiiana feel on one side, and now she's creating a meditation garden, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful space. The other example of what I wanted to share was a nature space, and that's Kay and the Furry Forest. I call it the Furry Forest because it's pet friendly. So Kay is a professional woman in a corporate situation who remained employed throughout the year, but her husband's new business was put on hold. She was still able to show up. They do a lot of things via Zoom and using technology already, but any on-site operations were suspended, inspections, that kind of thing. And although she was virtually managing her team members started to really bend her ear. And her boss also started to rely on her more intensely to help troubleshoot and deal with some of the corporate challenges. So she started to feel herself overwhelmed, tired, and stressed, and everything started to feel like a chore. In fact, her gardening, which has always been a source of joy to her, is kind of been delegated more towards her husband at the moment. And she started going out to the forest. So she takes her dog with her, and it's become their reset and social space. So the free forest is super relaxing and also a creative outlet. I join her and others up in that area pretty regularly. It's very relaxing. It gives her great joy. She gets exercise and the benefits from forest bathing, whether she knows it or not. And that's a whole other topic on the benefits of being in the forest. But she's also come up with this creative activity of where, if you've read Winnie the Pooh and you know about the 100-acre wood, she's started naming all the different trails. It's a really good place to reset and recharge. I think she's there now normally between 40 minutes to an hour. Those are just two examples of things that you might ponder doing or creating your own. Today you discovered that we all have a specific lens from which we view the world and that you can change it. You learned the 3 survival styles and saw how they showed up in my life and are invited to ponder yours. Because the lessons hidden within those stories are gifts. And you can change those stories by using and looking through a different lens because it shifts your perspective once you know how. And finally, by getting into nature, you can reap the benefits and reset if you make time to explore this activity. Now, my ultimate message to you is that you have the power to move through life more peacefully no matter what the situation. You can learn to feel connected to something greater. You can find solace and serenity. You can feel calmer and happier. You can become more resilient. And you can recover and recreate your journey into a metamorphosis. That means taking and turning that turbulence into transformation. And I invite you to do that through the nature system. So of course you can always get out in nature. It's going to help you no matter what you do. But having a system to help you shortcut and make the most of your time so that you move into a reset where you're calmer, you have more clarity, more creativity, and feel more peaceful overall. The nature system does just that. It's a unique way to observe, to help you develop an unusual new way of seeing things and experiencing an awareness that unlocks those hidden messages that are meant just for you. And those new skills not only enhance your experiences, but they empower you to move forward in your life with ease and with ways to repeat the process in any location. So that means you don't have to be in nature, although it is helpful, but you could do it in your local neighborhood, in your yard, when you're traveling, whatever the situation, whether it's an urban setting or not, the nature system can be of help. So the nature system waitlist is going to be opening soon. It's not yet available. But in the meantime, I wanted to invite you to join me on my Facebook page at the ArkLady, like Noah's Ark, A-R-K, for a mini nature challenge. Through that, you'll discover the simple steps to de-stress and feel happier, what duration you need to do in nature, what works best, 5 ways to enhance your experience, ideas for when you can't get outside, and the benefits to your body, your mind, and your soul. You'll be really surprised at all the things that have been around for eons and that are now validated by science. You have a lot to ponder. I hope you will get out in nature, and I hope you will join me for the Mini Nature Challenge on my Facebook page. You'll see my contact information in front of you, and I invite you to swim in the sea, for it heals whatever ails thee. That's for sure in my world, and I will certainly see you on the front row. Thanks for joining me. Bye for now.